Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Gunn, Senior Vice President, Human Resources and Customer Experience with Comcast Advertising, and a member of the C2HR Board of Directors. It is my honor to introduce this closing session on allyship, inclusion, and belonging. So much has happened in our nation this year, and I can't think of a more powerful way to tie all of this year's conference together. But before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to share a personal story. Allyship is very meaningful to me. I grew up in Canada, born and bred, and my father was a senior leader in the Canadian Post Office, where he represented Canada at the United Nations Postal Congress. I grew up having other similar leaders in my house at various gatherings, which my parents hosted. I lived in a white, middle-class neighborhood in Ottawa, but I had people of color in my life, adults from countries that spanned the globe. My parents were progressive. They taught me, as most Canadians of my generation, to respect everyone equally. I thought being colorblind as admirable and enough. While attending school in Canada, I read about the race riots in Chicago in the late 60s, but it wasn't until I moved to the US 30 years ago that I truly started to realize that being colorblind was not enough. I saw firsthand how people of color were treated. I was at times treated better just because my skin color. It didn't make me feel good, and it wasn't right. And it was then that I realized I had to be proactive, to be a voice for those who were afraid of speaking up or for those who didn't know how. I had to be an ally. Allyship is more than ever needed, and that's why I'm recommitting to being an ally. Thank you for allowing me to share that story. And now for some of the formal stuff. Before I introduce today's moderator, I want to remind all of you that this session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing at the conclusion of the conference through December 31. The panelists will take questions later in this presentation. So please post your questions by using the Ask button at the bottom left corner of your screen. Also, the session chat feature along the left side of your screen where you can chat with other session attendees. It is now my privilege to turn the stage over to Jennifer Williams, Senior Director of Enterprise Inclusion at WarnerMedia and the moderator of our closing general session. Jennifer?
Thanks, Sandy. I appreciate it. And hello, everybody. Again, as Sandy said, my name is Jennifer Williams, Senior Director of Enterprise Inclusion at WarnerMedia, and I specifically focus on our learning and development strategy. I look at learning and development, and I also look at the advancement and development of executives of color. And I could not be more thrilled to be with you today and to be joined by a fantastic panel of thought leaders who are going to talk with us about their experiences around allyship, inclusion, and belonging. So before I start, I'm sure you know who everybody is. So we have Fabienne Clermont. She is a Group VP at Discovery. Fabienne, can you give us a hello there? Hello. We've got Pooja Jain-Link. She is an EVP at Coqual.
Hello.
We've got Chris Powell, who's the CEO of Talmetrix. And we've got Lydia Williams, my partner in crime at WarnerMedia, who's also the Senior Director of Enterprise Inclusion, and she focuses her work on BRGs and culture and engagement. You are in for a treat today. And so I'll really start our conversation off very quickly because I want you to hear from them. As you hear us talk about this space, and many of you are in the HR, many of you in the HR space are looking to answers around how do we address areas around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I want to give a couple of terms I think that hope set the stage for our conversation today. So we think about diversity, right? We think about diversity as a fact, right? It is the unique differences, right, that make all of us uniquely different. But it's a fact, it's undisputed. Inclusion is a behavior. It's a choice, right? To include or not to include, that is the question. And then there's equity, right? Which is a little bit different. While diversity and inclusion are really about the people and groups, right? It's really about individual choice, about whether or not you decide to invite diversity or include it in the conversation. Equity is really about focus on the systems, processes, and procedures that actually dictate the way you do business. When you start to look at equitable practices, that's what you're looking at. You move away from people and groups to actual systems, processes, and procedures. And then there's a new word we've been hearing about over the last few years about belonging. So if inclusion is a behavior, belonging is a feeling. And so when we think about this topic around, put it squarely under that umbrella around inclusion and belonging. So you're going to hear this panel talk a lot about many of those terms, but I wanted to make sure that you got a little bit of a background before we started. I think there are two other things that you may be hearing right now in the marketplace as it relates to allyship. You may be hearing the word allyship, and some people just, when they use that word ally, may say that that's a more passive, right, way of engaging with others. Some will say it's a verb, and it's about individuals with privileged identities using their privilege to disrupt oppression for others. You may hear the word accomplice, right, which means someone who is directly challenging institutional racism and colonization, and also just the challenges faced by other marginalized groups. And you may even hear the word co-conspirator. So again, I want to make sure, again, as you hear those terms, whether they're in the marketplace or even in our discussion today, and our focus is going to be talking about allyship and how it impacts and how it addresses the way you will engage inside your corporate organizations. And so I want to start off first by really spending some time talking about that word ally. Allyship is kind of our title, but the word ally, because many will say, can you actually call yourself an ally, or does someone else get to bestow that honor upon you? And that's the first question we want to talk about with our panelists. And so I'm going to just go around the horn here, and I'm going to ask if the panelists would be willing to share first an experience where they've been an ally to someone and where someone has been an ally to them. So Fabienne, would you be willing to kick us off with a time where you've had an experience where someone was an ally to you? What did that look like?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I actually am the lawyer on this panel, so not an HR background, although for 25 years I've worked with HR, so I feel as part of an honorary member of the family. So my experience, because I actually started in a majority law firm, a big law firm, as a young African-American associate, and my experience there as one of none was very interesting. So my experience of someone being an ally to me came out of nowhere. I was a young lawyer in a deposition where you're sitting in a room. I'm dressed professionally. I'm sitting next to the partner, who is a older white male, and we're in a client meeting. Clearly, I'm taking notes. Clearly, I'm engaged. I'm asking questions. And at some point across the table from us was an opposing counsel, and he asked me to get some coffee and asked me to go get some coffee and make some copies. And of course, I was shocked, but I was also very young and wanted to impress everyone in the room. So I started to stand up, but the older partner took my arm and said, no, that's not your role. And essentially said, I will get you coffee because she's an associate here. And this is not her role here. And I'm not sure what you thought she was doing sitting next to me this entire time at the meeting. And he really put this person on the spot. And I was shocked by that, shocked by the question, shocked by the fact that he stood up for me, because I was ready to go get the coffee and make the copies, just to be part of it. And this partner became a friend but was an ally in the beginning. From my entire career, and 25 years later, we're still very, very close. But that experience right there is the experience that showed me that a Republican, an old school Republican, not Republicans of today, just to make the point, but old school Republican can look at this young minor African-American associate and stand up for her in this meeting. So that's an experience that will always be with me.
I love it. Fantastic. I love there. We're starting to hear again. There's the verb, there's the action. Pooja, would you be willing to share, right, a time when someone has been an ally to you?
Sure. And, I agree with you that allyship, there's some debate over the term. And I just think no matter what you call it, calling yourself that is not enough. It's really about the action. You have to do something And what you do can come in so many forms, and it can be simple, it can be big. For me, when someone was an ally to me, early in my career, it was the first time I was leading a client meeting, and we have, the meeting, and we take a break, everyone gets up and gets coffee, and the client asks me about my background. And so I start listing, my credentials. At that time, it was mainly academic credentials, but I'm, trying to be professional and list out, here's what I've done, and trying to sound qualified. And he was like, no, what's your background? And I was confused, and it slowly dawned on me, he meant, what is my ethnic background? And so I said I was Indian and Indian American, but I grew up in New Jersey, not too far from where we were at the time. And the conversation kind of went off the rails at that point, with many questions about, how I got here, my language skills, and I was not equipped at that stage of my career to really, know how to handle this, and was so grateful for a senior colleague in the room who stepped in and said, Pooja's a great member of our team, highly credentialed. We're so lucky she's here and that she's helping to lead this work, and kind of just shut the conversation down. And I still appreciated that. I was not equipped to handle that at that stage in my career, and learned a lot in that moment about how to do so and how to do so for others in the future.
I love it. Fantastic. And again, I hear you in both of these situations. Neither of you asked for that, right? Someone demonstrated that and proactively did that for you on their own. I love it. Chris, you want to share an example from your experience?
Sure. Good afternoon, good morning. I'm not sure of time zones these days, but yeah, I'll share a story of allyship. It's happened within the last 4 years, and I am well into my career, and that allyship can happen at any point in time. And for those of you who don't know, I run an employee research and insights company that is venture backed. So we've raised capital. And so I was out on the West Coast with one of my key investors out raising money for the firm. And it's a very similar situation. We're in a room waiting for some investors, potential investors, to show up. And literally the meeting gets started, introductions happen. The investors thought that my board member was the CEO and the primary majority owner of this company. And they just started talking to him directly as if I didn't even exist. And then he said, hold up, wait a minute, you are totally confused. Let me explain. I am here in support of this guy. And he goes in to set me up royally well. And I'm just sitting there like, I can't, it was just amazing that he took that and just took it by the horn and said, hey, wait a minute, you got this confused. It's not me. And there was an automatic assumption that I couldn't be the majority owner of a business out here raising capital, the whole 9 yards. And the table just turned, because they hadn't looked. If they had looked at the cap table, they would have known that, but they didn't. And so they just had some assumptions. And he is still one of my ardent champions and supporters and allies in helping me break down doors and get into doors that I otherwise might not be able to get into because of race in this particular case. So that's a quick story for you around allyship.
That's a great story. And I love that now we talk about it doesn't just happen in the early stages of your career, that it could happen at any point along the journey. So I love sharing that. Lydia, do you want to close us out on this one?
Sure. I think echoing what everyone is saying, I'm going to start with saying that I'm very fortunate to actually experience allyship on a regular basis from the team, from colleagues, from friends and family. But I am going to take my story way back before the term any of us even used it, right? Which was just basically about doing the right thing and being able to just kind of stand up for someone, right? So early in my career, similar to what we're hearing, is kind of being the only in the room, right? Being kind of judged without really kind of just the assumption based on what we look like. And then when the question would start, and this was early in my career, where there were those micro and maybe macro aggressions regarding to, oh, you speak so well, right? Oh, you don't look like you're Mexican. the bad jokes, the different, just all of these things kind of accumulate. And there was this one person consistently, whether it was in a group setting, in a team meeting, and then I learned later that privately, where she did something that I think was a beginning for me anyway, of what really is allyship when we talk about that action, which is to be okay with being uncomfortable and making everyone else uncomfortable in having these discussions. But she did it beautifully, not in a way where it was going to make anyone uncomfortable necessarily, verbally, or make it be a confrontational, but really more about asking the questions and making that connection of why would you say that? And then really aligning it to that feeling of when you have not felt respected or when you have not felt welcomed. And so being able to do that, and she was doing that very, again, calm, very much about being courteous, being very clear. And I think, but the part that I really appreciated was that I never had to say anything. None of us here, right, had to say anything. She would say that, she would say it very, and the part was the action that she herself demanded of those around for it to not be done again. Almost like that commitment of the understanding and then the action of, did you learn something? So that was kind of something that has stayed with me, Jennifer, throughout, of how just being uncomfortable sometimes is the opening of being a really good ally and making others having those tough conversations.
Yeah, it's a champion, right? We're going back to verb, right? It's an action. And so, really quickly, I mean, and you guys anyone can answer this one. Would you call yourself an ally, right? So because I think there is the question, this idea of be or not to be an ally, that is the question, right? Do you see yourself as an ally? Would you call yourself that? Or would you something else when you are demonstrating those behaviors? What do you think, Chris? Is that the word you use to describe yourself, ally?
It often isn't a word I use to describe myself because I'm inherently always focused on trying to create equitable opportunities for people in general. So it's not that, I don't open up my cape and have a big A on my chest. However, when we started talking about this topic around allyship, I've got several examples where I have played the role of an ally through actions, right? And I think for me, I go through the continuum of, all right, what does it mean to be a mentor? What does it mean to be a sponsor? And because I've been at different levels in organizations, sometimes when I'm sponsoring an individual, it also is allyship at the same time. And so it kind of gets all, it gets all intertwined. And so that's why I'm like, I don't know if I walk around with the A on my chest, but I will tell a story when I was an ally for a colleague of mine who happened to be African-American female. And by the way, I don't think she's listening, but she knows who she is. I used to tell her all the time, we both became HR business partners at this particular company at the same time. I had never been an HR business partner. I grew up in talent management and OD. And I learned how to be a good HR business partner from her. So she was mentoring me. However, as we were at this company, I noticed that I was getting more opportunities for promotion and advancement than she was. And I was like, she's better than me though. Literally, I still tell her to this day, you are better at this than I am. However, I had the gift of knowing how to navigate a little bit more dynamically than she was. She was pretty straightforward and about the book and, very technically competent, but wasn't able to get into certain conversations because people didn't see her in that way. And I think it was partly because of my privilege as a male. It was in a male-dominated industry, financial services, that I didn't realize it was privilege until I realized, like, wait a minute, she's better than me, but why am I the guy? And so I used to advocate and make sure that, hey, they would say things like, well, she's got 2 small kids. I'm not sure she's going to be up for this. And I'm like, wait a minute, you don't know her. Let me explain how she's able to do this, this, and that, and still run circles around me. And so those are those moments where I found myself having to, and we were peers, having to step in and challenge people's assumptions around what she was able or not able to do based on who she was. And so that was a story of allyship. And today she's a CHRO at a company and doing fabulously well and all that good stuff. So that, in my sense, is the things, opportunity where I'm in a role where I played an ally to her.
I love it. I love the description here now as we move away from, many of us have talked about allyship related to race or allyship related to gender or ethnicity, but you start to talk about allyship really in any dimension. How do you really advocate on behalf using your privilege? And I love the word you used there, Chris, because that's a word that oftentimes we reserve for a specific community, right? We will say white privilege, but it really is anyone who sits in a place of privilege who has the ability to extend that privilege to others, right? Begins to demonstrate this idea of allyship. So I really love you bringing that word kind of into play. And so I'm going to transition us into some additional words. And I'm going to start with Pooja, because Pooja at Coqual does a great deal of research work there, right? Leading the research function. And one of the words we talked about at the very beginning, I want to bring that back around, is this idea around belonging, right? We talked about inclusion is a behavior and belonging is a feeling. As we start to think about allyship and how does that make people feel, Pooja, we'd love to hear some of your thoughts around the research you've done around that word belonging. How does it fit on this spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know Coqual, we're a nonprofit think tank that does research and consulting on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the professional workplace. And for us, 2020 has really been the year of belonging. We put out 4 studies on the idea, and the first of those really defined the term, to Jennifer's point. So we said the definition of belonging at work is feeling seen for your unique contributions, connected to your coworkers, supported in your daily work and career development, and then proud of your organization's values and purpose. And we developed a 24-question scale to measure belonging across those elements of feeling seen, supported, connected, and proud. And we looked at these scores for a number of groups. So we looked at the groups traditionally examined by D&I around gender and race. So, there, unsurprisingly, we found Black women and Asian women scored lowest. We looked at underexplored groups, so LGBTQ professionals or veterans, also seeing them scoring low. And then we looked at sort of unexplored identities, we called them. So social style, political alignment, and we found some surprises. For example, working parents. We actually found that they scored higher on belonging than non-parents. And, we kind of thought working parents would be the group that was othered in the workplace. But what we learned in focus groups and interviews was actually they can find that point of connection more easily with colleagues and clients, in talking about the shared experience. And I can say, I had a child later in life. And so for most of my career, sort of in that non-parent bucket, when I crossed over, I can tell you the sense of belonging went through the roof. I was able to connect with clients in a way I had never previously been able to. That sort of small talk at the start of the meeting of, what's going on. You can sort of reference the kid. It was this like great game changer for me in terms of being able to connect with others, something that, I had struggled with previously, but now had this in. And we also looked at, what are some of the things that drive a sense of belonging? And so just a few highlights, we found that leaders who are role models and who embody organizational values was really important. So there's a big, focus on values and tone from the top. Having managers who provide praise, feedback, and are responsive to concerns. So managers really set this tone on a team. And then colleagues and peers who respect commitments outside of work, who also provide praise and feedback, and who communicate openly and honestly. That's crucial to creating a team environment with belonging. I'll just very quickly mention the second of our studies. We called it What Majority Men Really Think About D&I, and looked at this group, majority men, which we defined as majority gender, race, and sexual orientation. So primarily cis, straight, white men. That was the group we looked at in the study. And it was fascinating because as researchers in diversity and inclusion, it's a group we so rarely focus on. They're often the comparison group. You know, we say, look how poorly everyone else is doing in comparison. But for this study, we look deeper into their experiences and perceptions. And I think that's where allyship is most salient, because we did this study for two reasons. First, you know, we thought belonging was a term they could latch onto more, diversity and inclusion being terms that, you know, sometimes exclude them. But also we know to make real progress, and kind of getting to Chris's word and what you picked up on, Jennifer, about privilege and about power. White men hold the majority of power in corporate America. So we need them to be not just understanding of D&I, but really engaged in it. And that's hugely important to driving all of this work forward. And we found that even those who view it as very important, they're not actively contributing, you know, they're not doing the things we would want. And so we laid out a roadmap for how to push that along. And I'll just share one idea is really bake D&I into the business model, because the biggest hurdle we found for men to get involved was that they said, oh, I'm just too busy. And if it's a core part of their job, something they're assessed on and not just an extracurricular, then they can't ignore it. They have to make the time. And in weeks, we'll be launching our global studies looking in the UK, Germany, Poland, China, India, and Mexico. And I won't give away any spoilers, but the big theme is that while belonging is universal, culture is not. So belonging matters everywhere. It's a basic human need, but how you build it is different and varies market to market, also varies organization to organization.
Pooja, what a great setup for Chris, right, about this idea, right, around belonging and what it looks like. Great answer, first of all, what a great setup for Chris, because the many people just work for global organizations, right? So they may sit here in the US, but they have lots of offices around the globe. And what we find is that diversity, equity, inclusion, and even this word belonging takes on a different tone and a tenor when you go across the pond, as they say. And so Chris, you know, in his space had spent some time looking at that, this idea of inclusion and belonging from a global perspective, and would love to hear him share that, because I think it's important for our colleagues to hear what is the difference, right? And how do you look at this a little bit differently when you're doing that for your colleagues in other regions?
Yeah, happy to share, but it's a hard act to follow. So I'm happy to share. But so a lot of the work that we do is helping companies understand the factors that are influencing culture and employee experience. As Pooja said, that, you know, culture is different. It is not consistent across geography, regions, even within countries. There's so much diversity in terms of diversity of perspective and perception and sentiment around culture. And so it's nuanced. And so organizations are advancing their methods on how they understand and measure that within their organizations. But when we're talking about this concept of belonging and inclusion vis-a-vis differences, you know, culturally, we know in the Asia-Pac region that when you're looking at employee surveys, that you're going to get far more favorable responses. And so in some cases, you're not going to really get underneath the actual essence of the experience, because it's just the nature of the employee population there to be more favorable. And so you have to find other unique ways to get at the insights. And so we, in the research world, we call it false positives. And so how do you look at not only what people are saying, but also looking at the things that they are doing within the workplace? So one of the things that we see when we're working with our clients who have operations outside of the US, that not only are we asking employees their perceptions and attitudes and beliefs about the experience and the culture, but then we're also looking at other data points like, hey, what's the level of participation in employee resource groups if they're available? What's the level of participation in learning and development opportunities? How are folks engaging in aspects around corporate social responsibility and employee volunteering? Because these are all unique facets that are unique relative to region and location that look differently than they do here in the US. So imagine if you're in some communist-based culture where, hey, it's just got a whole different tenor. So us as researchers and students of this work, we have to find unique ways to be able to get at that. And so I love the point that we talked about earlier around belonging is really around a sentiment of feeling, right? So if you can think about it from the intrinsic standpoint, and then inclusion, you can find evidence of inclusion if an organization is inclusive by looking at some of those other data points I just mentioned, level of participation and engagement, are people involved? And then you can also ask them, you know, those types of questions. And so as we journey around the globe on these factors, it's important that organizations not take a US-centric perspective on looking at this information, and literally look at it by region and even within region uniqueness of this. I know oftentimes we'll have clients that say, hey, we need to run a climate and culture study for Europe. And I'm like, whoa, that's pretty broad. So let's talk about it. Let's unpack that, because even within Europe, there's different subcultures within subcultures. I mean, you think about Spain, you got the Catalonia region, which is different than the rest of Spain. So there's just all types of nuance and insights that I think we have to bring to the table when we're looking at belonging and inclusion and culture as we go on the global stage with it.
Wow, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. And I hope our attendees, I imagine they appreciate that as well, right? This idea of not a one size fits all, right? That we really are trying to do custom solutions. And you, again, I love how we've done this. You did a nice setup for Lydia, who leads our business resource group efforts. And we have them both in the US, but also in other regions around the globe. And one of the things that Lydia talks about, we talk about often about, is where do those business resource groups fit in the diversity, inclusion and belonging umbrella. So Lydia, you want to talk a little bit about where you think BRGs play a role in this space?
Absolutely. I do want to take a pause and just say that, you know, when we're talking about all this research, when we're talking about all the things that we're hearing, that we're seeing, there's this aspect of the self-education, but it's really about the active listening, right? A good ally is about the active listening. And what does that really mean? It's about, as we probably have all seen and have heard, is this like removing ourselves from it, like literally actively listening to see what is that person saying, that then will lead us to have a better understanding, right? So kind of not being real quick to start thinking about what am I going to say about this? And so, you know, Jennifer, when you ask about kind of the employee resource groups, and in our case, when we call them BRGs, business resource groups, is that's something right now every single person who wants to be an ally can do right now, is to actually participate and join the BRGs, right? This is a community, it's intersectional. This is where you will be able to lean into the conversation, to really listen and be able to, you know, raise your hand if you know, even if it's just something as being able to become a member and participate, right? To show up to those panel discussions, to be a participant, if you will, or raising your hand to actually lead some of the groups, right? And in that particular dimension of diversity, et cetera, where you are actually wanting to be more active as an ally, for example, being able, if you would like to be an executive, you know, presenter, executive that shows up, and really, if you really want to push, and Chris, you mentioned this kind of like the ally to a sponsor, that's really the sponsor is where you're now holding that key to the change, right? That's where you're really talking about the promotion, able to protect, prepare, and push, right? This aspect of allyship. And so this is where you can become an executive sponsor if you really want to be involved. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to be engaged, Jennifer, right now that everyone can do, that isn't about this big kind of, you know, public speaking or being, you know, having to have these conversations. They could be done privately as well. So we've seen more and more that sometimes these smaller, private, meaningful, real conversation where we're really listening to one another is really where the change happens, really where the impact that continues, as all of us just talked about. We're talking about things that have happened, whether 4 years ago or 30 years ago, that we're talking about what that one person did for us, that we are now continuing to evolve and do that for others moving forward.
I love it.
Which is empathy, right? It's that empathy part. The listening creates an understanding and the empathy.
Yeah, I love it. And so I'm going to, Fabienne, we're going to ask you to bring us home, because while we hear a lot from Pooja and Chris and Lydia talking about well-intentioned, well-meaning, right, people advocating on behalf of others. Sometimes that is the point, right? That comes up on the line, right? And so we'd love to hear you talk about, because I think in the HR space that is really important, for you to talk about legal considerations here, right? About what are some of the watch-outs related to ally efforts that you've seen that you want to really arm our HR professionals with as they begin to think about the journey.
Yes, thank you very much, Jennifer. So I would say that, in my space, I've been doing employment law for over 25 years. And one of the reasons why is because I actually love people. So it was the HR, but I always wanted to be a lawyer. So it was like, oh, what a great mix for the two. So I see sort of the both sides of it. And allyship, which is a word that really is very new to me, because growing up in my career, it was about sponsorship, champions. Those are the words that I grew up with. But now the broader allyship is a really great word. But one of the things that I would always caution HR people in watching the work environment and training their managers, or when people come to them, is that some people aren't ready for that allyship. Some people may see it as you see them differently, that you're actually treating them differently by speaking up for them, or thinking that they can't speak for themselves and making determinations that maybe they're not ready for you to be the one to speak up for them. And it's difficult because you have to, everyone now wants to be an ally or wants to be active in their allyship. Let me use the correct term, but it's not always received in that way. Especially if you're a manager, right? As a manager, sometimes you have to decide why you're doing this and make sure that the person is willing and is receptive to what you want to bring forward and want to bring them forward, bring their information forward or step up for them. And then it's interesting because Sandy said in his opening about terms of I don't see color, which people see that as a step towards allyship, right? That term of I don't see color. But interestingly enough, it's actually seen in such a negative way to many people that if you don't see color, you don't see me. And then right then you're in a position of you versus me, you versus them, that you have created unintentionally, again, that unintentional statement that gets a response that the person who made the statement has absolutely no clue where you go from there and how you do that. I love to also talk about the fact that, when people get support and people are ready and receptive for support, you need to go at the pace of what that individual is willing to do, willing to take on. Because, Chris, when he talks about a story of his female peer, he knew what she can do. He actually saw it, like he experienced all of those efforts. Just don't be an ally because you think I want to help this African-American person because that's all I need to do, because that can really crash and burn and really hurt that individual. So I mean, those are the type of things I try to caution HR professionals and managers, because when those things backfire, you feel burned, and then you sort of revert back into doing nothing and becoming passive, or the individual thinks that there is something that you see differently about them and actually sees it in a negative light. So that's really what I mean, to really think about your audience. Who are you willing to be an ally to? That's really the end line.
Mm-hmm. I like it. I lost you guys for a moment. I thought it was you all, but it was me. I was the one that was lost.
Jennifer,
that's right. I just kept talking, Jennifer.
No, and I'm gonna jump.
This is a sign for a fantastic panel, right? When they can go on without the moderator, the show go on. I love it. Fantastic.
Well, Jennifer, I was going to jump in actually and piggyback a little bit on what Fabienne was saying, because I think that, the other part when we're talking about that is really, and I'm going to just say it because I think it's a little bit of what I'm seeing a lot and hearing from, our employee resource groups and colleagues as a whole, which is this aspect of allyship as self-branding. And you asked the question earlier, Jennifer, in regards, when you've been tell a story when you've been an ally to someone else. And I have to be honest with you, I have a hard time even answering that, because it's just not something we refer to as a woman of color myself. It's not, I think the one big place that I've seen it a lot is obviously within the LGBTQ community, specifically when you go to conferences and they give you that brand, that badge that you have to wear, whether you're an ally or not. But as a whole, it's really more about, this idea of like, not the self-branding, but allow someone else to actually bestow that title on you. And I think that overarching, and that touched a little bit, Fabienne, what you were saying is like, a lot of the allies are also marginalized in one or other way. So it's to be able to then kind of speak on their behalf, or all of that gets really sensitive, because we're living through a really tough time right now, right? And with that is this idea of then kind of burdening by well-intentioned, by asking, well, what can I do to be a good ally? And rather than being able to say, what do I need to do to be a good ally, and thinking about that ourselves and doing our own self-awareness and our own self-check of really doing some self-education, really understanding like who and why am I doing this? Why do I want to be an ally, right? And being able to explore like, what are my motives? Because if the motives end up being because you're thinking it's a charity or it's something that you're helping others, then that may give you a reason to kind of pause a little bit. I kind of think of it a little bit, Jennifer, as kind of the ramp of allyship. Like some people want to jump to the top of the ramp and be like, I'm an ally, versus what the first step to even getting onto that ramp is to acknowledge and to want to actually do something. You're interested in it. In order to go up that ramp, it's really being able to really, that self-awareness, that education, that consistent listening and learning. And by the way, taking some criticism in the way, that discomfort we were talking about, that's what's going to keep getting you up that ramp and building that trust, and where people will then be able to bestow that title on you, versus again, and by the way, you can go to the top if you want, you can say that, but you're likely going to go ahead, there's no traction. So you're probably going to slide back down. So it's this idea of just continuously wanting to do the best and being able to really, again, that leaning into being okay with not knowing, not having all the answers, and maybe even feeling like you're not doing enough, but being able to take those steps. So just wanted to share that as well, because I think there's a lot of passion behind allyship, the receiving and the giving end as well.
Yeah, I love it. Fantastic. I appreciate it. So we've got a little time here to take some questions from our attendees. I'd love to be able to open up the chat or open up the room so that we can hear from others about what questions they might have about allyship. Do we have questions from, I think when I lost my connection, I lost my link that had all these really good, juicy questions. And so I'm going to ask my team, right, my Zoom team, if they can help me with maybe sending some of those questions over into the chat so we make sure we get some of those questions answered. So give us a second here. See if we got any. I'll tell you what I'll do. That's the old moderator fast on your feet. We'll do a quick little shuffle until those questions come through. And I'll ask you all to think about for a second. Now, this has got to be a short answer game, right? We've got a lot of passion on this panel about this topic. But I'd ask you to think about one place where you've seen really a best practice around allyship inside of a corporation. What's something you've seen an organization or corporation do that you thought, well, that's a really good best practice to really foster this idea of allyship inside of the company? Pooja, do you have one short one? One short one?
Gosh, if it has to be short, I would say quite recently, Coqual, we've been facilitating a number of what we're calling awakening conversations. And so these are facilitated dialogues with leadership teams on race, and they're global because a lot of the movement is in the US, but global leaders are not wholly aware of the history and the challenges. And so we're sharing some of that history, we're sharing some of our data on career barriers and challenges, as well as some of our frameworks on how to address this, how to show up, how to intervene, how to, I mean, be an ally, but in broader terms. And really, if we think about the power and again, the privilege that most leaders of organizations have, how they can leverage that to support underrepresented talent.
I like it. Chris, how about you? What have you seen? What have you heard? Give us a good example of best practice that we may want to emulate.
I'm glad you didn't have me go first because I would have. Let me put some thoughts to this. But I will tell you, there's a client that we work with that has a mentoring program, and what they've done is use the mentoring program as a way to do reverse mentoring. But what the whole idea is to help the leaders, in this case, most of the mentors or leaders, to get a broader perspective about understanding not just race and gender, but sometimes the unique factors impacting women of color, in this case, was their primary focus of helping leaders get a better, get some reverse mentoring on understanding that. So I thought that was a really interesting approach, a way to use an existing program to be able to drive and create more awareness so that as people move through the see something, say something, do something, they feel more knowledgeable and equipped to move through as an ally.
Love it. Fantastic. Fabienne, how about you? Any best practices you've seen, either from a legal perspective or otherwise, where you've seen really companies do a really good job of highlighting this work around allyship?
I mean, I'm sort of a newbie to this. So again, I mean, I love the reverse mentorship that Chris is talking about. So I really don't have much to add. I think our company, I'm just plugging Discovery. I think we do a great job with trying to get people to step up, speak up, and do the right thing. So that's.
I love it. Step up, do the right thing. I like the phrase. That's a good one, right? It's not a movement. It's not a moment. It's a movement. Step up and do the right thing. I love it, Fabienne. So we've got a couple of questions that have come to us from our attendees. And this one, it says to anyone, right? What do you feel is the most important quality of an ally? So I've heard you all talk about listening and empathy and being observant, but they've also got some other words in here: friendship and bravery and generosity. Something else? What foot, do you lead with? Do any of those words resonate with you on the most important quality of an ally?
I'll add to the list, which is humility, especially as we advance in this work and as we, start to get a little bit more tricky. You get into some of that tricky space in the diversity and inclusion work that folks have historically avoided doing. We're going to be entering uncharted territory, and we're not going to know what to do. And so I think to be an ally, you have to show up, you have to go out on a limb, you have to do things you might not be certain about. And it's okay to not know what to do, but do something. And you can start off, when you're trying to do something, to say, hey, I might not have this right. I'm on a learning journey. This didn't resonate with me, or this seemed to land poorly, and I just wanted to call it out. I think we should talk further and show, really just show humility, show that you're trying your best and you want to be engaged, and you might not get it right, but you're still committed and trying to hold yourself accountable.
Yeah, I love it. So Fabienne, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to say that, I would, if this is, it's not a word, but a phraseology, baby steps. I think that piggybacks on what Lydia said. Lots of people have so much passion and want to jump to the top, but most people, they've just lived their lives in just going to work or being friends with people. And I wouldn't put friendship in that. Like, I would take that out, because you don't need to be friends with, you don't need to like the person. You just need to step up and do something. And it could be just a little step, and little steps actually can help build a road for that individual. So I would put baby steps in there.
All right, humility, baby steps. I love it. Chris, you look like you wanted to say something that I could tell.
Just a little quick piece, but I think part of this is that we're all on learning journeys here, right? And I think we all have to afford each other some degree of grace in terms of being patient as people are moving through their continuum and expanding their perspective and awareness on this, because we're not all at the same place on these topics. And I think there has to be more grace and trust, which we know are lacking in our organizations, broadly speaking, that in order to move into this next level of the work, as I call it, for us as individuals and organizations.
Okay, great. So I'm going to end the Q&A period. We're going to come back to you, Fabienne. You said you were new to the space, but there's a question that lands squarely in your playing field, my friend. It says, my company was rolling out an unconscious bias allyship training, and then the executive order was issued, which challenges the message we're sending. As a lawyer, I know you can't advise on whether to move forward or pause, but what do you think will happen with this kind of training given? And I guess as we extend this right to the ally conversation, right? Do those kinds of things impact that behavior? Do you think it stops it, one, or fuels it more? So first, if you'd answer that question, and then let's tie it into this allyship piece.
So yes, that executive order turned everyone's head around. Obviously, it made everyone wake up, especially when you read the order itself. I mean, it definitely has a lot of terms that shake you a little bit, but we are going to expect that to be reversed very shortly. However, it is when it came out, I basically said you need to be either fearful or fearless. This fearful or fearless at this point. I mean, we are at a reckoning moment in our country and across the world. People are recognizing it. And are you really going to be afraid of doing something that is the right thing to do? Again, do the right thing. And I don't think you should be fearful. I think companies should move forward because a good unconscious bias plus training. It's not just about unconscious bias, it's unconscious bias plus with allyship, not pointing fingers at people and telling them that they are better or worse than others, because everyone walks in with a privilege. Because I have a privilege as being a qualified lawyer. People look at me in a certain light. Chris walks in and has his own privilege from his background. So it's not about that. So I keep moving forward and be bold, because I think that executive order will go away because of the change in our administration, but be bold.
I love it. Be bold. I love it. That sounds like a characteristic of an ally right there, doesn't it? Right? Bold and fearless. And you guys have come up with some really great terms. So we're coming to a close here. We've got about a minute and a half left. And one of the things we want to make sure is we leave people with some tools and resources, right? Things they could put in their toolkit that helps them carry this forward inside of their organization. Pooja, you'd mentioned something about belonging. Where can people find the belonging research that you talked about?
Sure. So Coqual, Coqual, sorry. It's been a long day. Our website, Coqual's website, coqual.org. All of our research, the key findings are publicly available, and we have a task force of about 75 member companies. If any employee at any member company can access the full studies, which are quite a bit more detailed. So you can go there to check it out. I'll also say we have a very large body of research on sponsorship, which you could read. And for members, we have a number of toolkits and action sheets that I think are really action oriented and can be helpful, again, on our members only website.
Gotcha. Chris, how about you? I know you've got a research firm there. Have you got tools and resources you want to point people to that will help them add to their toolkit?
Ours are more specific for individual companies' research, not the kind of research that Coqual does. So go to Coqual.
Okay. I love this.
Is it Coqual? Help me, because you guys just changed the name.
We just changed the name. We used to be Center for Talent Innovation. It's Coqual, and it sort of comes from that ancient word of co-equal, but Coqual.
I love it. Lydia, you and I had talked about some resources that we've been kind of garnering for employees. Anyone stick out for you? Any one of either the tools or articles that you thought?
Yeah, I there's so many, Jennifer, and everyone here. I think that, being able, I would actually say that, there's podcasts, there's shows, there's books, there's whatever form that you want to take in information, it is readily available anywhere you look. You can Google it. It's literally, we have a lot of resources. I think every company has a long list of resources. I think you can't force people to read it. You can't force people to watch it. You can't force people to learn it. So I would just, my big resource and tool for folks, I think, is just really about practicing some self-awareness and really being able to be authentic. I think these were some of the other words. Let's add that right into the other terminology of being authentic in wanting to learn. And then that takes you into, I think, being able to, so there's just so many, Jennifer, that I don't think there's just one. So I just encourage people to do that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, listen, I've got 30 seconds left. I need to turn the table over to Dave Crossan so he can close us out. I want to thank this fantastic panel. I know you enjoyed them as much as I did, talking with you about allyship and how that kind of changed the face of your business. Dave, you want to take us out? Uh-oh. Dave, you ready?
I am ready. Thank you.
All
Yeah.
right.
Wow.
Yes.
What a great way to finish the conference, and thank you to the panel. I'm Dave Crossan. I'm the SVP of HR at NBC Broadcasting and Distribution, and I'm also the president-elect of the C2HR Board of Directors for next year. Well, it's been quite a week. If you just look at it by the numbers, we've had 14 separate conference sessions or panels. We've had 5 roundtables, 16 hours of programming. There've been at least 34 presenters. That might be a low number actually. And we've all had the opportunity over the last week to network with over 550 HR colleagues from our industry. So pretty good going for what used to be and technically is a one-day conference. We're thrilled. For me, it's tough to pick out a highlight, but one phrase that sticks with me from the CHRO panel that we had on Friday best sums up what I think this event has all been about. I think it was Paul Marchand who suggested that the role of HR, particularly at this time, is to listen, learn, and lead. And if you think about it, the listening and learning has been very much what we've been doing this past week. Our challenge now is to, and I'm going to add another L word, is to lean in and to help lead our respective organizations through the next phase of this challenging environment that we're experiencing. We've talked a lot about. And I think this last panel was the perfect way to underscore that challenge. I'm certainly inspired to champion a stronger culture of allyship in my organization and really embrace the notion of being bold to help further the great work that's been done in a lot of our organizations this year in this topic. So thanks for that inspiration to the panel. Before we end our 2020 C2HR conference, I want to take a moment to applaud the many companies and individuals who've contributed to our event's success, including our generous sponsors and especially the conference champions, the Cable Center, Charter Communications, Comcast, NBC Universal, and WarnerMedia. We really appreciate the support. Also, let's give a big virtual round of applause to the conference co-chairs, Scott Porter and Julie Niemat, and the hardworking and talented conference committee. Thanks to that whole team. They worked really hard on this. I'm not sure we have a slide, but I'd also like to add our special thanks to the team from PSAV's Chime Live for the seamless production and the delivery of the tech platform. And in particular, a really big thanks to our talented and hardworking C2HR staff. Many of them behind the scenes that you've not met, but they've kept this whole thing going tremendously. So that's Partha Vidas, Melissa Hicks, Gail Brooks, Colleen Gorniak, and Macy Murray. And of course, Pam Williams, whose exceptional leadership keeps us focused on the task in hand at all times. And finally, a special thanks to all of you for your engagement and participation in this virtual conference. This year, we not only set a record for participation, we actually doubled attendance over last year, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. I hope that you've come away with new connections across the HR community and deeper insight into the issues we're all facing as HR professionals, and hopefully a renewed sense of spirit to help you innovate within your organization. Now, like you, we thrive on feedback, so I encourage you to complete the very quick conference survey. It's only 5 questions and it's available on the survey tab of the virtual platform. And of course, we'll use your input to improve things in the future, to work on webinars, networking groups, and be thinking about the 2021 C2HRCon. It's been amazing learning and networking alongside you over the past week. As our 2020 aspiring leader, Christine Calandros, said, teamwork makes the dream work. And I think we've tried to make that come alive this week. So it would be foolish for me to predict what's in store for us next year, but it's my sincere hope that we might be able to do this in person in 2021. So please stay tuned to hear about our plans, and thank you for your participation in HR. So take care, have a great holiday season wherever you are, and thank you. I guess that's a wrap. Thank you.